Hey, welcome back. Today we're going to be editing an image of a hippo. We're going to be using Lightroom alone, and I'll talk you through the entire process. The shot itself was taken at the Pilanesberg National Park, just a couple of hours north of Johannesburg, Pretoria area here in South Africa. It's a Big Five reserve, super place for getting game shots. The image itself is not a zoomed in 600mm prime, catch every hair and every follicle type image. It's more of wildlife in its environment. So the background, the scenery, the coloring, etc., is just as important in this image as the hippo itself. In fact, you could argue that the hippo is playing a secondary role. Let's look at the final printed image very quickly, and then we'll dive straight into Lightroom and get started. So here we are in Lightroom, and this is the raw image of the final print you've just seen. Before we start, let's just check that the lens correction settings that we have on import have worked. Yep, we've removed the chromatic aberration and we've enabled the profile corrections as well by default. Now, if I look up on the top left, you can see that it was taken at 1/320th of a second, f11 shot, and the ISO is at 900. It was relatively early in the morning, and because I'm at f11, that's pushed the ISO, which means I am going to denoise the image. So we'll jump into noise reduction. And here, as that loads, we'll just click on the magnifying glass and select to go in near the hippo head. And you can see as I press the mouse key, that's quite noisy. And that reduces it quite a lot. There's still some noise in the image, but I don't want to overdo it. So I'm just going to take it down to 40, just a touch. You can see what happens if you overdo this, then everything looks very plastic. Actually, I'm going to go 46. Now, that takes a little while, normally takes 30 or 40 seconds, and the outcome will be a separate file, a DNG file. So your original NEF file remains preserved. There's no concerns with that. And we'll be working on the DNG file. And there you go. You can see the file is being named .dng. Excellent, let's move forward. So going back up to the basic panel, we're just going to adjust the exposure a little. Just going to raise that. Highlights I'm not overly worried about in this image at this stage, but I might come back to it. I'm going to raise the shadows a bit. Blacks are going to come down a lot. And the whites are going to move quite a lot as well, just to try and increase that range a little. Now I've done that, I am going to bring down the highlights a little, and you can see immediately the colors that are in this image are just fantastic. I think the image lends itself to a 16:9 crop. So let's jump into the crop tool, select the 16:9 ratio. And I want all of the fog at the top of the image to be there in the final image. I'm going to crop in a little. In fact, a little more. That's good. And it's not quite level to my eye. Very difficult because there's no natural horizon. But to my eye, it doesn't look quite level. So I'm just going to adjust that slightly. And yes, I definitely prefer that. With that, I've got a few noise spots and I've got a few distractions that I'd like to remove from the image. This foliage, reeds, whatever it happens to be in the bottom left is somewhat distracting. And this lily pad or whatever this is also distracting. So I'm just going to remove those. We don't need generative AI for this, just the standard clone removal tool. Reduce our brush size a little. And we'll take those dust spots out first and foremost. And then we'll remove some of those distractions. There's another dust spot just there. And I'm not sure if that's a dust spot there or not. It might be my screen not being particularly clean. That's okay. So we'll come back out of that, go back into settings, just resize the image back to fit the screen. And yeah, that's good. So I'm going to add some masks, but before I do, I just want to adjust the vibrance. And I think it'll take quite an adjustment. I quite like that. That's very colourful. It's beautiful. I'm going to add a mask. And my first mask will be a linear gradient coming up from the bottom. I want to darken this area off and also increase the contrast without increasing the contrast too much into the background. Very rarely use contrast as a global edit, but in masks I'm happy to do so. I'm going to go to the overall tone curve in a moment, so I don't want to go overboard with that. Do want to reduce the exposure by half a stop or so. No, it's too much, in fact, so it's maybe a third of a stop. There we go, happy with that. And then I'm going to add another linear gradient from the top where we have this mist. And I want to reduce some of the color from that. So I'm going to take some of the saturation out. And I'm going to raise the whites. I'm going to raise the exposure a little. And then I'm going to jump into the effects panel. And I'm going to dehaze that top area quite significantly, just to emphasize that mist there. I want to remove the effect from these reeds a little more. So just raising that linear mask. That's better. That's better. Okay. One more mask for now. And I'm just going to select the subject. And I expect that will do a pretty good selection on the hippo. Indeed it has. And literally I just want to raise the shadows a little. Hasn't had a huge impact, so I'm going to have to raise the exposure. That's better. That's better. Going back into the basic panel, bringing those blacks up a touch. And then I'm going to jump into the tone curve, and it'd be a pretty standard S-curve, I would imagine, although much tighter. Do not be tempted to always go across to the guidelines that divide it by thirds. You've got to go based on the histogram, or else you won't get the effect you're looking for, almost certainly. It's quite nice. I'm going to drag this refine saturation tool all the way to the left. Adjust the colors as I want them in just a moment. Excellent. So talking of colors, let's jump into the color mixer. And I want to move the yellows to a slightly more orange color. Don't want to overdo it. That's probably enough. I want to make the greens a touch greener. Again, don't overdo it, Darren. From a saturation perspective, just a tiny boost on the oranges just to make those stand out a little bit more. I think the other colors are fine as they are. And on the luminance, I'm just going to darken those blues off a little. And I'm quite happy with that. It's coming together quite nicely. I'm going to jump back up to my masks and I'm going to add a very large radial gradient. And to do that, I'm going to reduce the scale of the image to 12%. And I'm going to grab this entire foliage here. And what I want to do, just bring it back to fill the screen, but what I want to do is increase the contrast here. And in fact, I'm going to increase the clarity a touch. You can overdo this so easily. I think that's absolutely fine. But I'm going to make this mask a touch smaller. You'll have seen me playing there with this patch of grass here. And I'm going to do exactly the same there, but with a smaller radial gradient. So again, touch of contrast and a touch of increased clarity. And on this case, a touch of texture as well. That really makes that stand out much more prominently. Excellent. One more mask. I'm going to grab a brush, quite a large brush. In fact, it's already probably large enough. Flow is at 50% already, so that's fine. I just want to accentuate some of this light, especially around these reflections. And then just accentuate them, accentuate the areas where the light is more prominent. That's quite nice. The selection. And I'm going to adjust the exposure. Far too much, Darren. And the whites. And I'm going to put in a little bit of more saturation on those reflections. In fact, I'm not. That's adjusting the water, the blues of the water too much. So I think I'll leave that as is. Excellent. Let's jump down into the detail panel. Don't think this is going to take much sharpening. But what I would like to sharpen is the hippo and then the front of that foliage, not the very top of the image. And I'm just going to reduce the radius to 0.7 and increase the sharpening. Yeah, I think to about 80. Just take the detail up. That's nice. And final mask. Another radial mask on the hippo. And essentially, I'm creating my own vignette. And what I'm going to do is darken the vast majority of the image, with the exception of the hippo. I'm going to intersect that mask with a radial gradient, a linear gradient, sorry, because I don't want it to affect the top of the image, and I don't want it to affect too much of this foliage. And I'm happy with that. Let's look at the before and after. So before the mask and after the mask. Before the mask, after the mask. Jumping back into this mask here. Just going to make that a little bit lower and a little bit larger, and I want to raise the shadows a touch. That's nice. Final adjustment on contrast, and I am at risk of going too far. So let's have a look at the before and the after. So that's the before image. It's a little bit misleading because it needed some exposure work doing to it. And that's the after image. Before and after. There we have it. The raw image straight out of camera, all the way through to the final image, using nothing but Adobe Lightroom. I hope you found the video interesting and hopefully picked up a few techniques, or at least prompted your interest to go and look a bit deeper. If you are interested in learning more about the techniques I use, then please drop me a note in the comments below, and I may well make a video in the future diving into a bit more detail, taking it a little bit slower and talking you through some of the concepts and some of the technicalities of the techniques. Same applies for the printing process. If you're interested in how we take the edited image all the way to the full print that you saw at the beginning of the video, then again, drop me a note in the comments below. As I say, I really hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, it would make a huge difference to me and to the channel if you would subscribe. Thanks for watching. Until the next time, you take care. Bye-bye.